there, it's Emma here from the Southeast branch of the library again. This time I don't have a craft. I'm going to talk about one of my favourite topics, which is period dramas. So a lot of people have read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen and seen the movie. This is the most recent one with Keira Knightley. But I wanted to talk about some hidden gems that we have in our library catalogue. So I'm going to introduce you to a few of my favourites. But just a word about Pride and Prejudice. So we have this one at the library, but we also have this is excellent, and the BBC version with Colin Firth is really good too. So if you haven't seen either of those, I would really recommend them. So another movie which I don't think really got as much attention, which I really like, is Becoming Jane. So it's all about Jane Austen's life, and it has Anne Hathaway and James McAvoy in it. So if you have seen Pride and Prejudice and you haven't seen this, you might really enjoy it too. So one of the things I love about period dramas is being able to read the book and then watch the film adaptation afterwards. So we're going to go through a few of my favourites with a couple of excerpts from the written text, and then talk about the movies that were made afterwards. So I'm going to be reading from Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. We have this in the library. And just to set the scene, so if you've read any other Thomas Hardy books, this one is a lot less bleak. So if you've read Jude the Obscure, you're probably like, oh, because it's a bit depressing. This does have bleak parts, but it's not nearly as bad as some of the other ones. So I really recommend it. So just to set the scene, Gabriel Oak is the farmer, and he wants to marry Bathsheba Everdeen. And so he's come to the farmhouse to ask her to get married to him, and finds her not home, but her aunt is there. And the aunt says that Bathsheba has lots of other romantic interests, which is not true. So then Bathsheba chases after Farmer Oak to set him straight that she doesn't have lots of suitors, and he asks her to marry him, and then this is the little part after. I love it. Indeed, I hadn't time to think before starting whether I wanted to marry or not, for you'd have been gone over the hill. Come, said Gabriel, freshening again. Think a minute or two. I'll wait a while, Miss Everdeen. Will you marry me? Do, Bathsheba. I love you far more than common. I'll try to think, she observed, rather more timorously. If I can think out of doors, my mind spreads away so. But you can give a guess. Then give me time. Bathsheba looked thoughtfully into the distance, away from the direction in which Gabriel stood. I can make you happy, said he, to the back of her head, across the bush. You shall have a piano in a year or two. Farmers' wives are getting to have pianos now, and I'll practice up the flute right well to play with you in the evenings. Yes, I should like that. And have one of those little 10-pound gigs for market, and nice flowers and birds, cocks and hens, I mean, because they be useful, continued Gabriel, feeling balance between poetry and practicality. I should like it very much. And a frame for cucumbers like a gentleman and lady? Yes. And when the wedding was over, we'd have it put in the newspaper list of marriages. Dearly, I should like that. And the babies in the berths, every man jack of 'em. And at home by the fire, whenever you look up, there I shall be. And whenever I look up, there will be you. Wait, don't be improper. Her countenance fell, and she was silent a while. He regarded the red berries between them over and over again, to such an extent that Holly seemed in his afterlife to be a cipher signifying a proposal of marriage. Bathsheba decisively turned to him. No, 'tis no use, she said. I don't want to marry you. Try. I've tried hard all the time I've been thinking, for a marriage would be very nice in one sense. People would talk about me and think I had won my battle, and I should feel triumphant and all that. But a husband, well, why, he'd always be there, as you say. Whenever I look up, there he'd be. Of course he would. That is. Well, what I mean is that I shouldn't mind being a bride at a wedding if I could be one without having a husband. But since a woman can't show off in that way by herself, I shan't marry, at least yet. I love that. So that's the book. I totally recommend it. And then they made this film, and it has Carey Mulligan and Matthias Schoenaerts in it, and it's really, really well done. I love it. So, yeah, highly recommend them. One of my absolute favourite period dramas is the BBC series of North and South. This is an adaptation from the book by Elizabeth Gaskell, and I love it so much. So we actually have there are copies of North and South on. We obviously had the DVD at the library that you can get, but also the book is available through Hoopla, so you can do the ebook on there. So I'm just looking at my computer here to read it. So just to set the scene of what's happening here, Margaret Hale is meeting Mr. Thornton for the first time, and I love the way that it describes what they're both thinking. So, and the situation is Mr. Thornton came to see Margaret Hale's father, and he's gone out to call on someone else, and she's having to kind of entertain him until her dad gets back. So, okay. Margaret opened the door and went in with the straight, fearless, dignified presence habitual to her. She felt no awkwardness. She had too much the habits of society for that. Here was a person come on business to her father, and as he was one who had shown himself obliging, she was disposed to treat him with a full measure of civility. Mr. Thornton was a good deal more surprised and discomfited than she. Instead of a quiet middle-aged clergyman, a young lady came forward with frank dignity, a young lady of a different type to most of those he was in the habit of meeting. Her dress was very plain, a close straw bonnet of the best material and shape, trimmed with white ribbon, a dark silk gown without any trimmings or flounce, a large Indian shawl which hung about her in long heavy folds, and which she wore as an empress wears her drapery. He did not understand who she was, as he caught the simple, straight, unabashed look which showed that his being there was of no concern to the beautiful countenance, and called up no flush of surprise to the pale ivory of the complexion. He had heard that Mr. Hale had a daughter, but he had imagined that she was a little girl. Mr. Thornton, I believe, said Margaret, after a half-instant's pause, during which his unready words would not come. Will you sit down? My father brought me to the door not a minute ago, but unfortunately he was not told that you were here, and he has gone away on some business, but he will come back almost directly. I am sorry you have had the trouble of calling twice. Mr. Thornton was in habits of authority himself, but she seemed to assume some kind of rule over him at once. He had been getting impatient at the loss of his time on a market day, the moment before she appeared, yet now he calmly took a seat at her bidding. Do you know where it is that Mr. Hale has gone to? Perhaps I might be able to find him. He has gone to a Mr. Donkin's in Canute Street. He is the landlord of the house my father wishes to take in Crampton. Mr. Thornton knew the house. He had seen the advertisement and been to look at it in compliance with a request of Mr. Bell's that he would assist Mr. Hale to the best of his power, and also instigated by his own interest in the case of a clergyman who had given up his living under circumstances such as those of Mr. Hale. Mr. Thornton had thought that the house in Crampton was really just the thing, but now that he saw Margaret with her superb ways of moving and looking, he began to feel ashamed of having imagined that it would do very well for the Hales, in spite of a certain vulgarity in it which had struck him at the time of his looking it over. Margaret could not help her looks, but the short curled upper lip, the round massive upturned chin, the manner of carrying her head, her movements, full of a soft feminine defiance, always gave strangers the impression of haughtiness. She was tired now and would rather have remained silent and taken the rest her father had planned for her. But of course she owed it to herself to be a gentlewoman and to speak courteously from time to time to the stranger. Not overbrushed nor overpolished, it must be confessed, after his rough encounter with Milton's streaks and cries. She wished that he would go, as he had once spoken of doing, instead of sitting there answering with curt sentences all of the remarks she made. She had taken off her shawl and hung it over the back of the chair. She sat facing him and facing the light. Her full beauty met his eye. Her round, wide, flexible throat rising out of the full yet lithe figure. Her lips moving so slightly as she spoke, not breaking the cold, serene look of her face, with any variation from the one lovely, haughty curve. Her eyes, with their soft gloom, meeting his with quiet maiden freedom. He almost said to himself that he did not like her. Before their conversation ended, he tried so to compensate himself for the mortified feeling that while he looked upon her with an admiration he could not repress, she looked at him with proud indifference, taking him, he thought, for what, in his irritation, he told himself he was, a great rough fellow with not a grace or a refinement about him. Her quiet coldness of demeanour he interpreted into contemptuousness and resented it in his heart to the pitch of almost inclining him to get up and go away and have nothing more to do with these Hales and their superciliousness. Just as Margaret had exhausted her last subject of conversation, and yet conversation that could hardly be called, which consisted of so few and such short speeches, her father came in and with his pleasant gentlemanly courtesy of apology reinstalled his name and family in Mr. Thornton's good opinion. So that's the first time that Margaret and Mr. Thornton meet, and I think that it's really good to read the book because his character doesn't really say very much. There's lots of moody stares, and if you read the book you get the full how he really feels about her and everything. So I hope you'll check out either on Hoopla the ebook of Margaret Gaskell's North and South, or the BBC adaptation called North and South that we have at the library. And this has been really fun sharing some of my favourites with you.